Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. My name is Matthias Schildwachter. I'm the Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs here at YSE. If you're in the MEM program, welcome back. I got to spend some time with you earlier today. If you're in the MF program or MESC or MF's program, welcome and congratulations on your acceptance to YSE. So it is my real honor to have a faculty panel today. So let's give a round of applause to our faculty members, and you can come and have a seat. All right, so for the format, I'm going to ask a few opening questions so you can get to know who they are. And then I'm going to ask them each a question about their research and areas of expertise so you can get a sense of how they spend their time here at YSE. Then the second question is going to focus on some aspect of the Yale or YSE experience that you may get to experience yourselves, but through their eyes. And then we'll wrap up with probably a general question and some time for Q&A. All right, so it should be a lot of fun. So welcome, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. And my opening questions are, if you could just share how long you've been a member of the YSE community. And we can start with you, Jim, and work our way down. What is your area of focus research and what you teach? And then beyond teaching and research, how else are you involved at YSE and on campus?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Sayers. I'm a hydrologist. I've been here for a long time. I think I'm a senior member on this panel, at least, since 1999. I teach courses in hydrology, watershed cycles and processes, and global threats to fresh water. In addition to my appointment here, I also have an appointment in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Kibbane. I'm a forest ecologist, and this is a little bit of a tricky question, but right now I am running a research program called the Applied Science Synthesis Program, and I'm a staff scientist working with a handful of groups on campus. I'm transitioning into a faculty position this summer where I will take on some teaching responsibilities as well as still working with the Applied Science Synthesis Program. But I will be teaching ecosystems and landscapes and forest health and TBD on what those other courses will look like.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eva Guerin, and I have been involved with the school for maybe longer than you. I'm an alumna of the school, so I graduated from the master's program in 1997. So it means I have started in 1995. So that's over 30 years, which is kind of scary. But in this capacity, I've been back here present at Yale in the School of the Environment since 2012. I'm the director of one of the centers and programs of the school, the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative. And then I'm also teaching faculty. So my background is in cultural anthropology. And so I study the social, cultural, political aspects of conservation and restoration of tropical forest landscapes. So the course that I teach, my primary role is running the center. And then I also teach a course in the spring for master's students on engaging landholders and communities in conserving and restoring tropical forest landscapes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Narasimha Rao. I'm a professor of energy systems here at YSE. I've been here about 7 years, and I'm also the faculty coordinator of the Energy Specialization and Learning Community. Not sure if you've heard about those, but at some point you will. I teach a few courses. My main course is Energy Systems Analysis, which is a kind of an energy literacy course. It's the nuts and bolts. It's a core requirement for the energy specialization. I teach a sort of seminar on energy and development, which is kind of my passion and my research. And I piloted a course on climate ethics and modeling last year, which I probably will continue as well. Those are the courses I teach. I'm disciplinary. I'm very interdisciplinary. I have an electrical engineering background, but I moved to the social sciences while I've been interested a lot more on the human dimensions of sustainability and climate change and energy policy. And so I'm very interdisciplinary.
Perfect. And Narasimha, actually, we'll start with you. And a lot of climate policy focuses on reducing emissions, but your work examines the energy needed for decent standard of living. How do we balance the dual goals of raising living standards in poor regions while also reducing global emissions?
Thanks. Yeah, well, that's a nice segue for my research. So I don't know if you know, but more than 2/3 of the global greenhouse gas emissions in the world today come from low and middle income countries, and that share is going to grow. And these are countries that are facing other development priorities in poverty eradication and human development. And the big question is, how do we combine these goals of meeting these development priorities and at the same time mitigating climate change? So my research is focused a lot on thinking about energy transitions and the demand side of energy systems, and thinking about how can we understand ways to maximize the impacts on human well-being and development while at the same time growing efficiently. So I think I study households, I study countries, and also at the global level to understand consumption patterns, how this would impact emissions growth in the future, but also likewise, how do we think about indicators of the impacts of climate change on people? How do we use clean energy to further development goals, such as using solar photovoltaics for energy access? And how can we design policies to maximize the benefits to people from them? So I do some empirical analysis, quantitative analysis using data like household surveys around the world, but I also do some modeling that is thinking about forecasting energy demand projections, but more explicitly incorporating well-being. So this idea of decent living is thinking about poverty eradication in concrete terms in terms of what people need for a decent life, and then translating that to energy needs and environmental impacts so that we have a more concrete linkage between human well-being and environmental impacts. Because today we think about human dimensions primarily in terms of countries' GDP and how that's impacted, but we need to disaggregate how we think about it in terms of inequality and people's well-being, and that's kind of my focus.
Cool. Thank you, Narasimha. Sarah, I wanted to go to you next, and I was wondering if you could share with the group a conservation trade-off in your research where the best choice wasn't so obvious, and how that experience shaped your approach to managing competing environmental objectives. So.
Yeah, really good question. So when we think about managing ecosystems, especially forested systems, there's a lot of things that people want, and some people want different things. So we might want to manage them for habitat for biodiversity. We might want to manage them to sequester and store more carbon dioxide to also work on greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating climate change. We might want to harvest our forests so we can build beautiful buildings like this or produce other fiber, pulp, paper, wood products. And so there's a lot of demands that we put on these systems. And I think a really great example is our group worked with the Biden administration Department of Energy to work on climate mitigation strategies for the nation. And we led research projects on how we should be managing our nation's forests to sequester carbon dioxide and to store it to protect against climate change. And in that example, we had different case studies for the different regions around the world. And our case study for the southeastern United States, which was and that work was in collaboration with some other researchers here, including Yuan Yao, who's an industrial ecologist. We suggested planting out plantation forest around the southeastern United States. And when we first presented that case study to a lot of our co-authors, they were a little bit appalled that we were suggesting pine plantation forest across massive amounts and calling it restoration or reforestation. Because if we want to maximize biodiversity, the way we're going to do that is not through pine plantations. It's going to be through mixed forest plantations. And so we had a lot of conversations about whether that was what we wanted to present and what that meant. And what we ended up saying was that in a lot of these places in the Southeast that are fields right now, it makes a lot of sense to grow the same species of pine. We produce a lot of the seedlings. We know how to grow them. They grow really quickly. And then those systems could potentially transition into longleaf pine or other forested systems, depending on where people want to take them. But when we're trying to maximize climate mitigation and biodiversity, there's sometimes a lot of trade-offs. And that was a really good example where we weren't working with landowners, but we were talking with policymakers and people who were making decisions about how to manage lands, and that we had to make some decisions about what kind of recommendations we wanted to make.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Jim, I wanted to ask about, a lot of your work examines how human activities affect drinking water and freshwater systems. I was wondering if you could provide an example of research that has changed how we think about managing water resources.
How many of you have heard of fracking? Okay, that's a good response. Well, fracking is one of the many stages in unconventional oil and gas development. Fracking, together with process called horizontal drilling are largely responsible for making the United States leading producer, the world's leading producer of oil and natural gas. You might not feel good about that, and understandably so, but regardless of how you feel about it, uh, fracking and its attendant activities has led to pollution of drinking water, and it's a great public concern. Members of my research team have been engaged in field work and in advancing models to understand the frequency of drinking water contamination by fracking and its related activities. Much of our work has been conducted in the Appalachian Basin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, where a large fraction of the population relies on private drinking water wells for their household purposes. And these wells are typically unmonitored and untested. It's also an area where more than 20,000 fracked wells have gone into production since about 2005. So our work, we've been doing this, it's been funded by several agencies, the Health Effects Institute, US EPA. We carry this out with health professionals, but we're hoping that the outcomes of our research will help inform regulations intended to safeguard drinking water supplies, particularly in residential areas. We think that this research can be used to inform monitoring programs to target locales and subpopulations that are most vulnerable to potential contamination from unconventional oil and gas development. And sort of more on the legal side, we think that the approaches that we've advanced can be used to improve source attribution in cases where multiple agents of contamination exist.
Thank you, Jim. I think there's sort of a theme emerging in all the responses about trade-offs. And so, Eva, I wanted to ask you, restoration and conservation often involve trade-offs between ecological goals and community needs. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you navigate those trade-offs when developing leadership programs or advising partners.
So a great question, a hard question, but a really good one. And it sort of brings me to this understanding and idea of, people are part of nature, right? So if we think about, so much biodiversity in this world is outside of parks and protected areas. And so they're in these really complicated human-dominated landscapes where you have agriculture and all kinds of activities going on, whether extractive or cattle ranching, all kinds of things happening. And so we really have to think about building sustainability into these landscapes. And this idea of trade-offs where you have to either have ecological goals or livelihood goals, I think we have to think about differently. And so the program that I run here at the school is about developing capacity of landholders, practitioners, and decision makers to build sustainability into tropical forest landscapes that are these really complicated human-dominated landscapes. And there are areas where, maybe it's not going to just be ecological benefits, and you're not going to be recreating a forest and having people out of these areas. And you're not going to just focus on the livelihood benefits, but you're going to come up with something that's in between. So there are trade-offs there. And so I'm going to give you a tangible example. We have a program in Panama. We work in what's called the Azuero Peninsula of Panama on the Pacific side. It's a tropical dry forest ecosystem, really high in biodiversity, lots of endemism in this area, but it's also a very highly threatened ecosystem. And it is a cattle ranching area. So people have been cattle ranching there for over 500 years. And so you have this very traditional cattle ranching going on where people cut down the forests, they burn the land, they then plant grasses that are exotic and so forth. And so you get this cycle that's really detrimental. But in that process, and that was all incentivized by the national government, by the World Bank and so forth. In that process, you have landholders that also protect forest and trees. They manage them, they plant them, they protect them for a variety of different reasons. And so some people will go into that landscape and it looks, there's tree cover, but there's a lot of conventional cattle pasture there. And if you're maybe from the conservation perspective, you'd say, well, I want to get cattle out of here, so we have to get rid of cattle ranching. But if you're on the, maybe the cultural anthropology side, you would say, well, people have been living here for over 500 years. These are their traditional practices. Is there some way that we can bring these two things together? So our program would focus on that and really try to understand the history of human use and practice in this area, the relationship between people and trees and forest, and then try to build interventions like agroforestry, including silvopasture, building biological corridors in agricultural landscapes, trying to figure out a way that these two components, the ecological benefits and the social, can coexist. And it might not be what everybody wants to see exactly, but you will have these trade-offs where you're going to have incredible biodiversity benefits, and you can also have a form of agriculture and cattle ranching that is much more sustainable in the long run, and you get a lot of livelihood benefits as well. So that's the kind of program that we have. We look at those kinds of approaches throughout the global tropics.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for this initial round of questions about your research. I personally enjoyed learning more about what all of you do, and hopefully you did as well. So as I said at the top, I want to transition to some questions about experiences you might have here at YSE through the lens of the faculty members. And Narasima, I want to start with you. You were just in Mexico last week leading a field trip for one of your classes. So I was wondering if you could talk about the learning objectives for the trip, how your field trip supported the broader goals of the course, and why you chose Mexico and the specific sites you visited on the trip. Welcome back.
Thanks. It was my first field trip. It was just absolutely amazing. So this is for the course Energy and Development. And so the course is as much about what is poverty and what is economic development mean in the first place, looking at theories of well-being over the years. And then second half is about what is energy poverty, what does it mean to have adequate energy to meet development goals and well-being. And so we look at a lot of problems to do with lack of access to clean supplies of energy in homes. So 2 billion people cook with solid fuels around the world in the global south. And this leads to 4 or 6 million premature deaths of women and children, right? So it's seen also as a public health problem because this particulate matter from the cook stoves you can actually see from satellites and affects air pollution around the world. So in our ivory tower and in the United Nations and policymakers, everyone says, okay, everyone needs to transition to clean cook stoves. But then we also learn about how communities think about these stoves themselves, what their opinions are of the choice of cook stoves and fuels, and why they hold on to using some of these, what we call polluting fuels, right? And how it affects other dimensions of their life, how it ties into other aspects of their life. For example, cooking practices, right? Similarly, electricity access. We're interested in accelerating access to electricity using photovoltaics, and there have been 500 million systems in the last 15 years that have proliferated across the world. But there's problems with how they actually provide services to people. If people don't have appliances, the electricity doesn't help. Anyway, so those are the themes that we look at in the course, some of them. And the idea was I always wanted students to go beyond the textbook and to actually experience these situations, talk to people. And I always wanted to go to India. It's expensive and it's far. It turns out Mexico actually has about 30 million people using cook stoves with solid fuels. And they also have, several 100,000 who lack electricity access, and they're getting a lot of project developers installing systems with photovoltaics. So it's close by. I actually don't speak Spanish. I started to learn, but I wanted to do a trip there. I found someone who knows Mexico really well, and we visited a number of places. We visited communities that are using solid fuels, that are trying out solar ovens and other kinds of clean stoves. We spent a day with them, and we understood from them what the stoves mean to them, why they choose what they choose. We learn about their sense of identity and connection to place. We did cooking classes to understand how they use the different kinds of stove, and they demonstrated to us how they're used. We visited sites where photovoltaic systems were installed in homes as well as in schools recently, and talked to them about that. And we experienced what it was like for a high school set of students of 90 students who were in this kind of mobile home with 35 degrees Celsius, studying for 5 years without any kind of air conditioning, and who just recently got air conditioning. And the teachers were talking about how they saw dramatic changes in the experience of students' attentiveness and things like that. So, and then we met a minister who used to write the pledge to the Paris Climate Agreement for Mexico, and we had dinner with him. We met a couple of people, policymakers as well. So it was really absolutely insightful trip. down at the scale of communities, up at the scale of policymaking, all packed into 1 week, throwing in a little bit of Montezuma's revenge, which is, unavoidable when you go to Mexico for the first time. But it was a really wonderful experience, and a lot of students came away thinking, yeah, this really vindicates what we learned in the classroom, and really felt a sense of the challenge for trying to balance these trade-offs between benefits for people, benefits to the environment, which really clash a lot.
Thank you, Narasimha. And so the reason I asked this question is that not all of you, but many of you will have the opportunity to take advantage of a field experience during your time at YSE. Might be a local day trip in the New England area, or it might be a trip overseas. Eva, you were just in Panama, right, for a week as well with her class. So, and all YSE field experiences are fully paid for if you're doing it through one of the courses. So next I wanted to, Sarah, go to you. So, all of you have been accepted to YSE, but you've also all been accepted to Yale. As I mentioned in the MEM session earlier, that means you can take classes, not just at YSE, but you can take classes throughout campus. So Sarah, I wanted to ask you, you've been, your background in Yale has been involved with many different parts of the campus, including, so bear with me here, we have YIBS, the Yale Institute for Biospheric Studies, YASP, the Yale Applied Synthesis Program, and YCNCC, which is the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture. So Sarah, from your perspective, what are the benefits to YSE students of engaging with opportunities across Yale, not just within YSE, and how can those experiences broaden their approach to environmental challenges?
Great. Yes, so when you're not traveling abroad on all these awesome workshops, there is so much for you to do on campus to stay busy. I remember a postdoc that I knew had all of these seminars planned out on campus that he would go to, and which ones served food and which ones didn't, and what food was served at each seminar. And he was basically able to eat a large proportion of his meals through attending seminars. But beyond just having food at seminars, all of these centers and programs, including the center and program that Eva runs, have amazing opportunities. They bring a lot of different speakers to campus to talk about a lot of similar topics that cross-pollinate with what we're hearing, but sometimes from even other interdisciplinary perspectives. They bring in scholars and residents that provide opportunities sometimes for students to do extracurricular research. They provide research funding for those of you who might need funding for doing research in the field or even here on campus. And so they're great connection points to just sort of expand opportunities of learning and thinking beyond the faculty that we have here at YSE.
Thank you. And I know so many of you in the audience are MESC students and MFS students, but if you're in the MF program or the MEM program, you also might be interested in research. My next question is about research, and it's for Jim. So you've mentored many MESC and doctoral students over your time here, and I was wondering if you could talk about the role that faculty play in supporting research students or students interested in research at YSE. And from your perspective, what are the critical skills and qualities that you've seen in your most successful students?
Okay, I'll take the first part, and then if I forget the second
I'll
part,
bring it back
remind
up for you. Yeah.
So the first part was, how do faculty engage with research-oriented students? Well, I think we're involved with pretty much every step of the research endeavor. Faculty helps students conceive and frame the research questions that'll guide their research. They offer advice on research design and data analysis. And they provide feedback on communicating the results of student research. And this could be in terms of presentations at workshops or presentations at national conferences, or equally as important, journal articles. So there's a lot of technical assistance, but we also provide other assistance in terms of facilitating career development opportunities for students. And a lot of the time we're there for moral support and encouragement. Research is hard, it doesn't always go right, but we're there to help you keep your head up, and to also help you troubleshoot problems that'll undoubtedly you'll encounter along your research pathway. And the second part was about skills?
Yeah, what would you say the critical skills or qualities you've seen in your most successful students?
I guess this might be a little trite, but first and foremost, key quality is that these students are intellectually curious. And that's important, but they have to be intellectually disciplined as well. That they have to identify problems that are not only interesting, but are important and that are tractable and can be completed during their time here. Students, successful students also tend to be able to manage their time well, to stay on track and work steadily, and to keep up that momentum without externally imposed deadlines. Good master's and PhD researchers are also committed to developing good communication skills. As you can tell, I'm not a gifted public speaker, but I think that communication skills are something that can be developed, but it takes commitment and hard work. And if that commitment's there, I think results are usually realized. Students have to be resilient. I suggested before that things don't always go right. Models break, experiments fail. Sometimes results are not conclusive. And those points in your career can be demoralizing, at least temporarily. But you have to be resilient and persevere above that. And then I guess the last thing that comes to mind is that students who are successful and that I really enjoyed with interacting with most are kind and generous. You work in an interdisciplinary area, you're going to rely on each other, rely on collaborators. And my favorite students, and I think type of people that other people enjoy interacting with, not only are interested in getting better themselves, but helping people around them get better too.
Thank you, Jim. So in your time outside of classes, you might participate in a field experience. You might take advantage of, well, free food, but also some great opportunities outside of these walls. You might partake in some research. You also might be involved in one of YSC's 30+ centers, programs, and initiatives, and Eva is a director of one of them. So Eva, I was wondering if you could talk about, you're the director of LT, which is the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative. And how do you see LT and really all centers and programs as critical for extending education and opportunities for YSC students beyond their coursework?
Yeah, thank you. So I have to say, in addition to the exceptional faculty that we have at the school, one of my favorite things about the School of the Environment are the centers and programs and initiatives. So I always describe them kind of as little either NGOs or think tanks that are usually connected with a faculty member. They're usually thematically focused. So LT, for example, is focused on capacity development in tropical forest landscapes. But there's the Center for Business in the Environment, there's the Urban Resources Institute. There are many different centers and programs, and you've got really a cluster, and Sarah, yours as well, sorry, YASP. But you have a cluster of professionals and faculty that are focused on bringing all of the scholarship that happens in the school, and that is involving faculty, it's involving students and alumni, and bringing that out in some capacity outside of the walls of the School of the Environment. Whether that means working with communities in New Haven to plant trees, whether that means working with LT to do restoration in the tropics, you get a window basically into applying what's happening here in the real world. And so you've got people who are doing this, they're full-time, they're, depends on the center, but there can be anywhere from 15 to 20 people working in a center. And there are usually opportunities for internships that you can have during the year to work on different aspects of how whatever the center is focused on. There are also summer opportunities. A lot of the centers will connect you either with internship opportunities all summer, or you can go and do research in one of our sites, for example, or the Forest Dialogue. If they have a dialogue going on, you can go and do research over there for the summer. You can get support from the Tropical Resources Institute to get support to do that. So basically, the centers and programs just give you this opportunity to be part of applied work that happens outside of the school, but is very much driven by the faculty and students here. So I highly recommend that you talk to people. If there is a theme that you're really interested in, go meet with somebody. Just say, hey, I'd really love to learn more about it. What are the opportunities that you have? And make that part of your experience, because I think it's a really special and unique part of the school. Um, yeah, I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything too, because you've got a lot of really exciting research going on with YAS.
Yeah, no, I think you said it. We do a lot of research and we work with external partners, conservation partners, land managers, policymakers, where they sort of drive the research questions, and then we collaborate with them to synthesize the information to answer whatever pressing question they have about ecosystem management. So we've worked with a lot of students who either they're, students might do a thesis if they're doing a research-based degree, or you might do some sort of capstone project. So we've worked with students who have alignment in their interest, and what Jim said makes a lot of sense of how that integrates in with what we're doing in terms of dedication and question development, so we can provide some of that support and then networking out as well.
Yeah, and I think just one more point, because what Sarah's saying is absolutely right. The centers and programs usually have an incredible network, a professional network around the globe. So if you are interested in making a contact with another university or an NGO or something like that, go to the center and program that's focused on something that you're interested in and learn about their networks and resources they have to connect you out, because that is really invaluable, especially when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, or if you're doing research or want a summer experience. Having those kinds of connections are wonderful through the centers and programs.
Thank you. So I think the best way to wrap up is, I have some other questions to ask them, but instead I'm going to ask all of you the same question, and you can answer it. And then while they're answering that final question, I encourage you to think of any questions you might have for the panel, or the panelists. And then we should have time for a few of your questions as well before we wrap up. So we don't need to go in any particular order, whoever's ready, but the question for all of you is, looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenge in your field, and what gives you hope? And yeah, Narasimha, take it away.
Start. Well, talk about the challenges in the research areas, not in the real world, because that's too overwhelming. I see a dominance of sort of techno-economics in this field of energy and climate research, and that has a disconnect with the real world and the way it's moving. And that also coincides with the disconnect in between disciplines. So there's a lot of research going on at different scales, but through different disciplines. So, at the household community scale, you have anthropologists and sociologists studying how people and communities behave with respect to behavior change and climate change. You have political scientists studying policymakers and political economy. But then you have these models that have been created by engineers and economists that are a little bit idealized from some of those realities. And we've been moving in the direction of trying to incorporate human institutions into these models to more accurately project and think about how we represent changes and therefore what policies we need to accelerate change. So there's this biggest challenge is trying to bridge across these disciplines, bridge across scales, create more realism in some of these models. And that to me is why we do interdisciplinary research. So what gives me hope is that in this field, there has been a burgeoning of interdisciplinary programs and research, and I think that's really important. It's very challenging, but it brings really interesting people to our programs. So I'm very enthused and hopeful because of the students we get. Researchers, PhD masters, researchers, but also in the MEM program, because they do think broadly and are encouraged to think broadly, and we need that.
Okay, I'll try something. So I think if we're thinking about the field of tropical forest conservation restoration, one of the things that I've been talking a lot about with my students is the complexity of the funding world, and how there are, the donors are really looking for fast changes. They want positive things to happen quickly. And so you get funding to restore 100 million hectares of land. That's what the call is. And they want to see that fast. And so you get projects that are funded for 2 or 3 years. And honestly, restoration, if it's going to work, is going to take 10 to 20, if not longer, years. And you're going to have to really understand the social and the ecological complexity of the regions where you want to either regrow or plant trees and forests. So I think that's an enormous challenge. I do see there are some donors out there that understand that, but I think it's something that all of you are really going to have to push in your careers. We talk about it as with the current students who are about to graduate, about really demanding a change in the way that things are funded and the understanding of how results, the impact that you're going to see, and what's going to take a really long time to get there, and trying to match those things, because otherwise there's the push to see changes that just you might plant 1 million trees, but do they survive? A lot of them will die, and really trying to educate the donors out there to understand how to do things effectively.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of depressing things that we can say as challenges. So forested ecosystems and temperate forest systems that I study have a lot of challenges, and it's climate change and sort of just changing environmental conditions. But we have a lot of pests and pathogens, especially here in the northeastern United States. We're seeing my park closest to my house, the city, has started cutting down all the beech trees because they're all dying from a new beech leaf disease that has hit them, and they're dangerous in a park system where lots of people are walking. And so we're seeing these like major transitions happen really quickly that are really devastating. And so the challenges are great, both from a lot of different pressures, but mostly because of decisions that humans are making, or decisions that humans are not deciding to do. We're not deciding to reduce fossil-based emissions, or we're not deciding to work on decreasing the importation of these pests and pathogens. So the challenges are actually sort of the same challenges that when I started my PhD, or the things that I was studying when I was in an undergrad, that are pressing. I think the hope is, I think we actually know a lot of the solutions. Like maybe we don't know everything about beech leaf disease yet and how to manage it effectively, but we do generally know a lot of the actions that we need to take. But the challenging part, and that's why being here at this school is, what we've been talking about is so important, is because it's an interdisciplinary challenge. So ecologically, we actually have a lot of information on what we need to do for these most pressing challenges. It's aligning the social and cultural and economic values all together to work in a system. And to sound a little cheesy and also echo what's already been said, I think the thing that most gives me hope is, so the research program that I'm running, we do a lot of connection with a lot of folks who are doing a lot of management on the ground, and a lot of ENGOs and a lot of policymakers. And almost every, connection with organization, there's like the handful of people who are like, I went to YSE. I'm a YSE grad. I'm doing this cool work. And so, and I've been here, I didn't answer Matthias's question. I came here in 2022 to start the Yale Applied Science Synthesis program as a research scientist. So I haven't been here that long, but I've been here long enough now to see a couple classes graduate, and the students that I've worked with are now doing amazing things, working with amazing organizations, and are now feeding back sort of research ideas and networks and linkages. And so the things that give me hope are the students that come through here, and the students who have come through here who are taking what they've learned and sort of magnifying it. I get to sit in the ivory tower and either be like, woe is me, or put my blinders on. But a lot of the students are going out and actually working and solving all of these problems. And so that's what gives me hope.
Let's give
Yeah.
the audience a chance to ask a
Yeah,
question.
Jim very generously leaned over and said we can pass on my closing thoughts, so we can get a few.
There's
more
going to be
questions.
access to safe drinking water, by the way.
So I have a microphone, and if you have a question, I can come over and hand it to you. And we'd love to, if we can get 1 or 2 questions before the break, that would be great. So who would like to ask a question first? Yeah, thank you.
Know where Lily is, but I was kind of hoping that she was going to hop with the question before me. What do you see new students struggling with the most as they're adjusting to not only life at YSE, but also these new classes? I'm speaking as someone who is not really immersed in the field that I'm pivoting into with grad school, kind of anticipating that challenge of getting immersed in a new, or not new, but just a different kind of field.
The first challenge that students encounter once they're getting ready for the start of the semester is course selection, especially MEM students. There is definitely prescription in our curriculum. We have cores and electives, but we also have a large number of courses, a large number of interesting courses. And so students are often, particularly during their first semester, torn, which courses should I take now? And my advice is often, well, keep in mind that you have 4 semesters here. You're going to pick some winners in that first semester. And if you don't get all the courses that you want, you still have 3 semesters left. But course selection is a big dilemma for incoming students. Talk to your advisor, talk to second-year students, and that will help refine your path.
Thank you.
I think another dilemma, as the one who said go around campus and get all your free food, is there's so much that you can do. Like there's 30 plus centers and programs. There's all these external to YSE centers and programs. And so the breadth is wide. And so a lot of times I see students, it's really easy to be overcommitted. And so the balance here is sampling is really great to touch a lot of things, but you also want to go in depth. And that's not just with your coursework, but like with your experiences. And so finding that balance of seeing what's available and what's out there and what the opportunities are, and then drilling into the things that you really want to work on and the skills that you want to get or the networks that you want to build. And to do that drilling in, you're going to have to say no to some opportunities. And that's a really hard balance to make. But I also see it with students who want to do everything, but then they don't really get to do anything by trying to do everything. So.
Wonderful. Probably take one more question. I know there's a break, but we will stick around if there are any questions. So does anyone else have a final question? Thank you.
Thank you. This has been really interesting and I really appreciate you guys sharing. My question is maybe a little bit of a loaded question, but I currently work as an energy consultant doing evaluation, measurement, and verification for utility companies. And I'm seeing my industry change a lot with the policies of the administration right now, changing equity frameworks that are in utility companies. There are just a lot of ways that the work I'm doing is shifting. I'm wondering, do you see long-term effects of policy being put out by this administration affecting the fields that you work on and potentially the career opportunities for us going into grad school? Like, come 2029, what do you think will be lasting effects of what we're experiencing right now?
Thank you.
I'm guessing that question is partly for me. Yes, I do think so. I do think there have been changes. And speaking to people in government offices who, in the Biden administration, built up over years and decades, in some cases, offices and institutions that were removed in a matter of days. It'll take time to rebuild some of those, and that percolates into jobs. It percolates into our research funding. But you have your views of politics and how things may improve in the future. We hope for changes. Yeah, I do think there's a realism there in terms of how things have changed. But the advantage of the ivory tower, it doesn't change the questions that you're asking, doesn't change the importance of your work, in fact, increases it. And you have a lot of support around the school for creative ways to seek employment or other ways to engage. But yeah, we have to navigate that just like every other institution in the country.
Yeah, we've experienced that a lot in the tropical conservation restoration world with, the end of USAID. A lot of funding for organizations came from USAID projects for conservation. There was a biodiversity earmark of several $100 million that would fund all the big groups. And so several of the partners we worked with are just gone. They lost their jobs overnight in many cases. And so you have to pivot. I mean, I think it's you have these really strong networks that you've developed. And I think being here during this time is fascinating. You can, you have a wonderful group of peers with you going through the same thing and asking questions and learning and trying to understand how to change things moving forward. And so there are still opportunities out there, and you've got It's a great time to do research. It's a great time to have an internship with a center and program. There's lots of funding to do these kinds of things. So don't give up hope. I mean, this is the time to ask the questions, the tough questions, and to figure out, these are the realities. You're going to have to figure out how to navigate this. And so what better chance to do it with, 100 and plus people who are trying to figure it out at the same time, with a lot of wonderful faculty and staff and alumni who are also, remember, you're going to have this amazing alumni network with people who are out there, still doing it and trying to make sure that you can have a path forward as well. So you have a really wonderful group here. But it's a great question, and it's a tough one.
Well, please just join me in thanking this panel for their time today. It really has been